Hi, my name is Al Clemmons and welcome to Education 101. We're packed up for a great journey today, and one of the first things we want to do before we take a road journey is grab our GPS, because that's going to be our primary tool for this learning today. So as part of that, we also know we're going to have two stops along the way today. One of those is a discussion of contiguity principle and redundancy principle, and the GPS will be the medium in which we'll communicate that. It's a great artistic design for this learning today. So let's get to our first stop and talk about contiguity. When we discuss contiguity, one of the things we want to discuss is how words and graphics matter when it comes to the use of space between them. And we also want to discuss how pop-ups can be a great tool when they're used well. So let's talk about space first. If you take a look at a standard GPS display, you look all over it, and there's a lot of data going on in a very small space. But it's easy, user-friendly data to see. We can see text. We see that we're 4.8 miles from our exit. We know that exit 3 is that exit, and we also know something about the road itself, M271. We also have little audio clues that will come up from our navigation device. The voice will come up and also tell us things at one time. But in this case, you see an excellent example of how the space is used. What if, however, we were to separate the information on the text about exit 3 and the rest of the visual display? It would look like this. Let's take a moment and look back and forth between where it says exit 3 and the rest of the display, and think about how hard your eyes are working. They're working really hard, and there's a good reason why we don't want to separate our text from our graphics. It makes the worker, it makes the learner here, or the driver in this case, work harder to assimilate the data. This is why we stick to this format here. So this is, again, an excellent use of the space that we have. The space is very excellent for a reader here to look at everything all at one time, which of course is very valuable when you're driving. It's also very valuable when we're learning. The other thing we want to see here is how we use pop-up tools. Pop-ups are a great tool, and again, we know, for example, looking at this, that our exit's coming up in 4.8 miles. We know something about that exit, but as we get closer to the exit, we're going to get a pop-up window much like this one. And in this window, as we take a look at it, we know the voices come up, and it has told us there's a left exit coming up soon. It may even tell us how far, depending on how your configuration is. And we also know by this pop-up that it's 0.6 miles away. It's an exit to the left. We also see the exit number and some information about the exit itself. This is an excellent example of how we can use pop-up tools. There is also, however, some problems when it comes to these kind of tools as it relates to the next principle. It's always important that we only show our pop-up, as an example, when we talk about it. So there's no point, for example, for this to pop up any earlier than it needed to, or any earlier than the voice that would come on and tell us our left exit is coming. It's important to synchronize. It's also significant to keep them simple, because you don't want to confuse any learner, or in this case, a driver. So as we take a look at that final exit before we go to part 2 of this journey, we want to review contiguity. We talked about space and how to use them, and that significant relationship between the space of words and graphics. How pop-ups are a great tool as well. It's also important that the words themselves, when we speak them, correspond with the graphics that we use, and we keep them simple. Now, as we take a look at the second step along the way, is redundancy. Never print what you're going to say. We learn better when we don't have all that confusion going on. We don't need narration, we don't need graphics, we don't need text. We also know that we're going to have problems if there's a discrepancy between the text we hear and the text we read. So for example, if this voiceover came up and said, take this left exit now, and the text came up and said, do not stay straight, that would be incredibly confusing to us. Even though there are certain situations where this might be okay. And that brings us to the second part of this. There are special situations that allow special actions. We can always use text if we don't have an image of some kind. We can always use it when it's used together with the text itself. For example, if the voice came over and said turn left now, the graphic of the text would show at the same time. We can also use it if language is an issue for someone. So before we take that last exit, let's take a look at redundancy one more time. Never print what you're going to say. We know it's very confusing to people to get all the information all at once. However, there are some times when we need to do that, and those cases are pretty special. So as we finalize our journey, here's where we've been. Contiguity and redundancy are key principles. Space matters. Say it when you show it, and never print what you're going to say unless you have a special cause to do so. And like any good learners, we always want to reference our material at the end. And these are the references we used for this presentation. Thanks.